much. John McArdle.
I think, following on from that, I think the committee should look at all these issues through the lens of human rights. As it's well known, the UK Special Rapporteurs were here in Scotland last December to gather evidence because there's an ongoing investigation into the UK government for grave and systematic human rights abuses of disabled people under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. At the time of the Scottish referendum, we were promised that there would be as near a system to federalism and home rule as possible. We made a submission to the Smith Commission, which demanded that all powers over social security be remitted to the Scottish Government, and that simply hasn't happened. Quite frankly, what we face, that disabled people are facing right now, is the catastrophic impact of cuts to their social security through migration from DLA to PIP. Let's not forget that when George Osborne stood up in the House of Commons, he declared that there would be a 20% reduction in the disability budget through PIP. So it was designed, it's as far away, the testing is as far away from evidence-based medicine as is possible to get. It's underpinned by something called the biopsychosocial model of disability, which is completely unscientific and not worthy of being used in a social security system worthy of the name. It's the same system that underpins the work capability assessment. It was imported from the United States, and Unum Provident, who were called by the Insurance Commissioner of California, who are told that they were operating disability denial factories and were banned from 50 states and fined billions of dollars, advised the UK government in drafting up this test. So the Scottish government must reject the underpinning of both these tests. It must speak out more forcefully about the number of people who have died and committed suicide after a work capability assessment. We get reports from all over the UK that people go for a work capability assessment and consequently lose their disability living allowance on the basis of the answers that they gave to the work capability assessment. So there's that knock-on effect. It's a gatekeeper, it's a gateway. So I'd just like to say as well that as regards the work programme, you're getting people who are disabled who are being found fit for work or put into the RAD group, and that's happening more and more. The goalposts have been moved. Our campaign began in June 2010 when a man called Paul Reiki hung himself after a work capability assessment in June 2010. And we've been campaigning solidly since then to try and make the system safer. It was our campaign through our medical advisor, Dr. Carty of Leith, who put forward the motion to the British Medical Association that the work capability assessment regime should be scrapped with immediate effect. This was in 2012, to be replaced by a rigorous and safe system that doesn't cause avoidable harm to some of the weakest and most vulnerable people in society. So since that was passed and became BMA policy, we've sought to get that implemented. And the way in which we've done that is by trying to raise the existence of Employment Support Allowance Regulations 29 and 35, which give exceptional circumstances that where a person's, because of a person's physical and or mental impairment, there would be a substantial risk of harm to them. They should not be found fit for work or found to have limited capability for work. Unfortunately, because of an impasse on the contractual arrangements between the BMA and the DWP, our success has been limited in getting knowledge of these regulations put out there. There's local medical committees around the whole of the UK who are simply refusing to provide disabled people with the letters that they need to support their application, and the DWP refuses to build into the system, despite some assurances that they gave, and also following a successful judicial review by the Mental Health Resistance Network, that the WCA discriminates against people with mental health problems. None of this has been put into place. So we still have people now who are being wrongly found fit for work and who are committing suicide. And it's not just one or two people. You know, one death is too many. But when we're getting stories of people committing suicide every other week, and it's in the newspaper. We really need to speak up because these flagrant human rights abuses are taking place on Scottish soil today. And I think that the Scottish Government must demand from the United Nations a copy of that report, which is only being sent to the UK Government. If human rights is devolved to Scotland, then our First Minister has a right to look at that.
Mr McArdle, sorry, absolutely take on board everything that you've said. I think a number of us around here obviously have had cases that you're referring to also. Could I just say that basically you're talking about disabilities, physical and mental disabilities, and certainly as the committee we could write and ask for a copy of that report. And I just wanted to ask you, we have Damien Green coming to give evidence, and certainly we could raise that specific with Damien Green. Would that be okay just now? Because obviously I want to go round the table with others, or did you want to make another salient point?
Yeah, I would like to make a point.
Okay, it's just obviously the time is short.
I'll be very brief.
We'll be able to come in again, it's not a problem.
Very, very briefly, Black Triangle campaign has submitted a report to Police Scotland, which has been sent to the Procurator Fiscal's office regarding the deaths of David Barr, Paul Donachie and Misty E, whose case was documented by the Welfare Commission for Scotland. We believe that an offence has been committed at Scottish law, that a public official has willfully failed to carry out their duty. It's currently being looked at by the PF's office, and I'd just like to say finally that, if disabled people cannot rely on the law to uphold their civil and their civil rights, then it's a very sad day for Scotland. And I would we just hope that as part of the 7-year action plan for human rights in Scotland, that all public agencies will put human rights at the very heart of their decision making. Thank you very much.
Ms McArdle, so I would need to bring in Mr McArdle because he wanted to reply directly to George Adams and Helen's question. So, John, did you want to reply to that? And then it's Alison Johnson and then... Sorry.
Yeah, in reply to Mr Adams's question, Black Triangle campaign and our sister campaign in England, Disabled People Against Cuts, signed a memorandum of understanding many years ago with, not long after we began, with PCS Union to campaign jointly against the involvement of private for-profit companies in the disability assessment regime. I think the consensus is absolutely unanimous across the whole disabled people's movement in the UK that they must go. Not to mention the often criminal behaviour of the companies concerned, talking about Maximus. Its history in the United States in the court system is absolutely appalling. So we don't want any of that. And last week I watched the proceedings from last week of this committee online, and somebody spoke about rights and responsibilities. Well, I'd just like to say that that cuts both ways, because government ministers, in particular the Secretary of State, has a legal responsibility to respond to senior coroners' prevention of further deaths report. So I'd just like to put that on the record. Thank you.
John McArdle.
Yeah, thanks. We're keenly aware that the budget for the work programme was severely cut, I think, by about 85%. And we're also keenly aware that the block grant has been cut by 10%. So, because obviously, ideally, what we're doing is we're trying to petition for mitigation of cuts and bridging arrangements to be put in place until PIP is being operated by the Scottish Government. And we would just like to ask that, because we think that it's a defining feature of our society in Scotland, how we look after people who are sick and disabled. So we would just like to see that prioritised, and we recognise the difficulty financially that will pose, but I think that where there's a will, there's a way. In terms of, I appreciate what has been said here about advocacy, the importance of advocacy. For example, the Citizens Advice Bureau in Leith is currently facing great difficulties. They're trying to raise £20,000 to stay open. It's absolutely critical that people get the advice that they need. We would love to see the establishment of a disability law service or a hotline where people who are having problems could be put in touch with agencies that can help them, because we know that where people do have advocacy, the likelihood of things having a good outcome is much, much higher. And in terms of sanctions, we would like to see a complete end to sanctions. We believe that they are a violation of the fundamental human rights of individuals. It is a human right to be able to eat. As Ken Loach said, hunger is being used as a weapon. And we were horrified to see, if I'm not mistaken, in the Scotland Act that an instrument which is used to devolve power to Scotland actually imposed an obligation that saying the Scottish Government must not mitigate where a DWP sanction has been imposed. We would like to say that the sanctions regime is itself unlawful, we believe, under human rights legislation, because in the determination of an individual's civil rights and obligations, there must be access, under Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, there should be access to an independently constituted tribunal. And that doesn't happen under the present system. So I think that needs to be challenged. And I think that where people are sanctioned and having to, are basically made destitute, relying on food banks, that the government has every right to step in to protect people whose human rights have been breached in this manner. I would urge the Scottish Government to consult with the government lawyers' legal service at this issue. Finally, before I leave today, I'm going to present this to you, Convener. It's a book called Cash Not Care. It's by Mo Stewart, an ex-Women's Royal Air Force veteran. 6 years of work has gone into this. It is, I believe, the most authoritative account of what's gone on, and a textbook example of what not to do with a social security system. And I would recommend that every member of this committee gets a copy of this book by Mo Stewart, because you'll find it absolutely invaluable going forward in your work.
Very much, Mr. McArdle. We don't usually get advertisements, but that is not a book, that is information, which I'll be very glad to read.
It's evidence.
I've not got enough time to get into some of the stuff that I wanted to raise, but I'm sure that it'll come up eventually. But we need to make sure that people are treated with dignity and respect. And as Mr. McArdle says, that these horrific, instances are not revisited again. I'd just like to thank you all once again for your contributions. That have been excellent. And I'll close the meeting just now for 5 minutes for the witnesses to move in a comfort break for the committee. Thank you.